Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Chase Jarvis Live Show here on Creative Live. Very excited to have you joining us today, and you are in for a treat. I'm well aware you're here for the guest and not for me, so a little bit of housekeeping, and then we'll get right to it. I will be your host and guide for the next 60 minutes or so, and right now we're streaming live to creativelive.com/TV, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. I don't know. Is there anywhere else you can stream to? We're streaming all over the place. And if you are watching on any one of those platforms, I see your comments. However, if you want me to see your comments first, I see those at creativelive.com/TV. You can just go click join chat up there. Just based on that's our proprietary technology, and I can see those a little faster. So I'm looking forward to forwarding on your sentiments and questions if you have them for our guest today. Maybe start out by telling me where you're tuning in from. I do see those comments in real time, so let me know where you're coming in from across the planet, and I will make sure to share that with our guest. And speaking of our guest, I'm going to get right to it. Christoph Niemann is an artist, author, and an animator. His work appears regularly on the covers of The New Yorker, National Geographic, The New York Times Magazine. His art has also been subject to numerous museum retrospectives. He's drawn live from the Venice Art Biennale, the Olympic Games in London, and has even sketched the New York City Marathon while running it. I think there's a story there we'll need to unpack. He's created the New Yorker's first augmented reality cover, as well as having hand-drawn the 360-degree VR animation for the magazine's U.S. Open issue. His clients on the commercial side include Hermès, Google, Museum of Modern Art, etc. And he's a member of the Alliance Graphique Internationale in 2010. He was inducted into the Art Directors Hall of Fame. You're starting to, I mean, I could just continue to read the accolades of this particular creative hero, but rather than doing that, maybe we just welcome him to the show. And Christoph Niemann, please.
Really bad right now.
Welcome to the show. You getting some feedback? Is that what I just heard?
I can only hear you chopped up right now. I have no idea what is happening. It was pretty good. Can you hear me? Can you give me a thumbs up?
I can hear you. This is the internet.
Fine.
There we go. I think you're back.
This is the internet. Yeah. Now I'm back. Yeah, that seems better. Okay.
Welcome to the show.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh man, when I shared this with you before we went live, that you've been on our list of people that we wanted to have on the show for some time, and your drawings and illustrations have inspired me, along with so many in the Creative Live audience, for a long time, and I am fascinated by your process, and that is where I want to spend some of our time to start off our conversation this morning. Before we get too deep there, though, give us just a little bit of background, where you're from, how you were initially interested in art and creativity, and then we'll talk about all of the work that you have put out in the world. But first, take us back to the start.
Well, the start is that probably like most of us, I can't remember the time where I was essentially not doing what I'm doing today. You know, like drawing, thinking of images, looking at magazine, like any serious artist. You know, this is how you spend your childhood. And then, you know, always wanting to do something like that. And it wasn't necessarily illustration. It was just like, that's more where I ended up with. And then I studied graphic design. Not because I wanted to study graphic design, but because in Germany it was actually it wasn't possible to study illustration. So I had to do the larger thing. And I'm so happy that happened because that meant I had to study photography, study typography, filmmaking. All these things were part of this caution. I wasn't necessarily that interested in that when I was studying, but in retrospect, this really informs what I'm doing today because it has gone beyond drawing. Nonetheless, when I was in my fourth, fifth semester, I realized I was studying in Stuttgart, where I come from, southwestern Germany, fantastic school. But even though I felt that all the important work happens at the desk, I realized at some point there's something about the world out there that you have to expose yourself to. And I wanted to do an internship, and I happened to go to New York. I looked through my yearbooks, and I felt all the pieces that interested me. They were like from the Times, from the New Yorker, from the ad agencies in Madison Avenue. And so I applied for internships first with Paul Davis, fantastic illustrator, designer, also part of the Pushpin group, and then in the year after that with Paula Scher at Pentagram.
Oh,
so
yes.
It's where I kind of got my first kind of taste of New York. I started doing some editorial illustration, and then I moved there after graduation, basically the week after I moved to New York. Spent 10 years doing almost exclusively editorial work, which I absolutely love and still love, but that was my lifeblood. And then in 2008, I moved to Berlin, still working for New York a lot, but just changing things up. And since then, I've been doing much more self-generated work, so doing essays, stories, series, still a lot for editorial, but it's not so much the assignment, it's not so much the written article, it's more my own impulse. Doing a lot of prints, museum shows, different things, and I felt I'm trying to change with the times, because I think that's probably like the biggest thing I learned is that even though in my head I have an idea of what I want to do, this is a communication profession. It's about what happens between the audience and me, and we all change. So the way we communicate has to change as well. And this is what drives me into the studio every day.
Oh man. Well, what I heard was so much variety in both your background, the work that you have endeavored to put out. And speaking of variety, people all over the world thanking you for spending your time with us today. We've got New York, New Jersey, California, Kansas, Mumbai, India, Northampton, UK, more Southern California, another New York. Oh, the South Africa contingent just showed up. So to say that
Awesome.
you've inspired people from all over the world is not an understatement. I found it interesting that you mentioned studying graphic design not because you wanted to, but because it was all that was available. Was that a limitation of the school system? Was that a limitation, or were you always just interested in illustration and design was the closest thing to it? Or how did you were you aware that you were an illustrator and graphic design was just a way to get close to what you really wanted?
Well, I have to be really precise. I didn't want to become an illustrator. I wanted to become a black and white illustrator.
Wow.
Because my youth was growing up with felt tip pens, and I hated them because you could never really do proper, like flat color. And black and white, when you work with ink on paper, that's the only way you can do perfectly sexy black white shapes that looks like it was printed. So it was like I was really on a warpath with color, because like this whole messy watercolor thing, markers, these magic markers where everything looks cloudy. I hated that. So if it would have been for me, I would have wanted to study ink, black and white illustration. So everything else was a compromise. No, but the study system in Germany, you study when you're a little later. So I think 21 or so. I had to do social services before. And then it's really 4 semesters of basic education, a lot of drawing, and then all the other things I mentioned. And then basically automatically do a master's. And then that master was in illustration, but the whole system was built on the idea that you have to do illustration on the foundation of graphic design. You get a graphic design degree, but this is something I wholeheartedly agree with, that when you work as an illustrator, especially today, you need to have a view from the entire context. I couldn't think of like doing illustration today without moving images. This is by now, I think that I guess when you're like in the middle of your career, you might get away with, but if you're a young illustrator and you don't have some moving imaging qualities in your portfolio, I think you're in trouble. Thinking in the context of typography, of graphic design is so vital. You don't have to do it professionally all the time, but I think you have to have an extremely firm sense of that. So in retrospect, I think that was the only way to study illustration, with that padding from all these different sides.
Well, you've named so many of the folks that are just absolute icons in graphic design. Also, folks who are on Creative Live. You mentioned the folks at Pentagram, Michael Bierut, Paula Scher, both taught here at Creative Live. And if you're a designer, I would steer you toward some of those classes. Was that an early childhood dream to put yourself in the context, if you will, the folks who were leading the charge? And at what point did you move to the U.S.? You mentioned that the stuff that you liked was coming out of the New Yorker, the editorials, and a lot of the advertising on Madison Avenue, where folks like Michael Bierut and Paula Scher were leaders. At what point in your career did you see that and come to the U.S.? And was that an important move in your development to put yourself amongst the thriving global, I guess maybe the centerpiece of the work that you wanted to do? How important was that?
It was hugely important, and I don't consider myself like an extremely adventurous person who kind of, I'm just going to go to a different country where I don't really speak the language, don't really have the kind of like the cultural background. And at first it was the internship, and so I do this internship. I find myself in New York on Paula's team, and then they always had lunch at Pentagram in a room, and all of a sudden you sit across from Michael friggin' Bierut, like for lunch, and hear him talking. And he's one of the wittiest, smartest, like he's an incredible designer. He's also an incredible writer on top of which is kind of unfair. And I was like, this is real, because I didn't assume I would go there and have these interactions. It was more, I go to New York, but that you actually end up kind of having contact was mind-boggling. And there was this moment at the end of my studies where everybody in Stuttgart, it was kind of, you go to Berlin or Hamburg. That's where the big advertising agencies were, or Frankfurt or Berlin had the media. That was kind of like what you would do. And I felt that, at this point I was 26. And there's this amazing thing when you're 26, where you kind of know what you're doing. You studied, so you kind of like, you have the basic craft, but your pain threshold is so incredibly high. Like it's just not when you're 40 or even 35. And I sensed that, and this is something I'm kind of proud of, that I sensed at the time that this is a unique chance where you can do something as insane as moving to New York. Where, of course, the whole apartment thing was a nightmare, the work permit, all these things. If I had to go through that stuff again today, I wouldn't make it. And this is something I've been telling students all over. It's like, this kind of insane mix of chops and talent and craft and naivete. This is a magic mix. You have a time window of 5 years in your life where it doesn't matter how long you sleep. You can kind of have all this input. You can have the output. It doesn't matter like what happens around you. You can still function. And I think this is the one thing I'm really proud and happy with, that I took advantage of this window, because I know with 35 I couldn't have done that. And it's even like, it was expensive, of course, to that, but it's not even a question of money. It's a mindset that everybody has this, I think, a short window with, and I'm so happy that I took that advantage to just go out there, then spend like the 2 years struggling, kind of getting my assignments, but most importantly, really just dealing with life in New York, which is, it is absolutely insane. And then kind of slowly kind of getting my footing after that.
When Sunday Sketching came out, which is one of your several books, you've got like 4 or 5 and a couple children's books with, if you are a parent and you are watching this, it would be really, I have to advise checking out Petting Zoo and Chomp, a couple of kids apps that you created with John Huang. Just the breadth of your work, and you talked about the energy that you have as a, in your mid 20s, and yet here you are continuing to crank out work. And I'm wondering, is that still this mindset piece that you talked about, or is that a product of just doing what you love? And have you found your spot in the world? And if so, what would you tell other people who haven't yet found that?
I feel as far as that goes, it's pretty consistent. This is what I love doing. And it's not even that I get bored with one thing and I have to do another one. It's just I'm truly interested in all these different things. And technology has enabled me to do things now. Doing something like this app, or doing a video now that I can put together in a day, would have taken like a team of 20 people and like $100,000 probably only 10 years ago. I mean, just like the camera in my iPhone is an incredible piece of technology. So now all of a sudden I can do all of these things, and I have to do them. I think the biggest difference from today to maybe 10, 15 years ago is that worked a lot on a system where I can actually spend more time working and dealing less with other stuff. And this is a constant battle to kind of free up time, kind of run the studio in a way that I can really have as much creative time at my desk as possible. And there was a time, maybe roughly 8-9 years ago, where I kind of always refused to have an assistant because I feel I have to explain everything. This is impossible. I can't do this. What happened is I was basically doing admin I would work for 2 hours from kind of 9 to 11, then do admin until 5 or 5:30, and then the real creative work started after that, which was a nightmare. Booking flights and doing taxes and writing invoices, and this whole system was untenable. And what I figured out now is to really get much more creative time out of it. And I think if you get 5 hours every day of time where you sit at the desk, drawing, thinking, not producing finished artwork, but 5 hours of just time with a pencil in your hand, you can do the most incredible amount of work and you can have the most insane output. But it's actually I find it a huge challenge. It takes a lot of help. It takes a lot of probably also a lot of privilege to get 5 hours. It sounds little, but it's really a lot. But once you have that, and you do this 300 something days a year, you can get some stuff done.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I think 5 hours it does sound luxurious, but I know so many people watching and listening. We've got Lori and Janelle and Mark and Manny and John. Abhishek, Patricia, for just to name a few, that the concept of being able to do the work that you love and to do it at the level that you do it requires commitment. And clearly 5 hours as someone who is as advanced as you are in your career, it's a huge amount of time. And yet I think it's fascinating that that's where you attribute, it seemed to me you attributed a lot of the credit to your process. Now, before we go super deep into process, talk to me a little bit. You said you have a system for not getting trapped in admin. So I want to hear what that system is, and then I want to go to your process, and in doing so reference a bunch of things that you said in Sunday sketching. So what is this magic system that you've got for not getting sucked into the admin? Is it just hiring people to do jobs that you don't like to do, or what's your solution?
Well, a lot of it really had to do with getting to work with other people. And there was something I refused to, in retrospect, there was the one thing where I really felt I didn't think this through properly, or probably my angle was too limited. I was, so many of us are one team, one person teams, and we do everything. And then you almost feel like you built this perfect machine where every finger is on 5 levers. And you feel, oh God, if somebody else has to come in and I have to explain them how all this stuff works, the whole thing will just explode. And what I didn't think, and this was really, in retrospect, I can so clearly see what that thing was. I didn't think of what if I had somebody who would help me, that would allow me to do stuff. And I would be so crazy. It's my favorite example. When I was in New York, I'm working with other people in the studio, but I'm working all by myself. At some point I realized I cannot go to the post office. Whenever a job required going to the post office, I will turn it down. If somebody wanted my portfolio mailed, I said, can't do it. Because everything that makes me, where I have to leave my desk, it's absolutely impossible. And so I'm just learn to live without sending stuff. Anything that wasn't digital didn't work. Any original, somebody says, oh, I love the drawing, can I buy it? It's no, because then I have to pack it and do something, just it's not happening. And all of a sudden I had people working with me and I realized, oh, the post office is an option again. I can start doing silk screens. I can communicate. I can send little cards to people. And all of a sudden, new possibilities arose. And so it really has a lot to do with people and having systems. This is really boring stuff. Having your tech in order. Dropbox, and I don't want to advertise any, I'm sure there's other services. Dropbox has saved me probably now 3 hours a day. I remember just, you're at the studio, you're working on something, you're going home, oh, I forgot the file. You go back to the studio, email the file. And then at some point you just email, all the files all the time. You get lost in it was like 2 hours just every day trying to find the right file. So I think having a super tight system for having your stuff online organized, having your taxes, accounting, it's the driest thing imaginable. But if there's one mistake in there and you get an audit or there's something wrong, 3 days go by to clean that mess up. 3 days where you cannot work. So doing this, it's unsexy. Yeah, oh, we're artists. We don't love to do that. I don't really love to do it, but I just know it allows me to do a better artist if I don't have to deal with that stuff constantly. If it's not constantly nagging in the back of my head, it's like, oh God, like you didn't really save enough for taxes, and oh God, like can I afford the next computer? It is a privilege, but I think if you can afford to have a good system in place for all the boring stuff, it will allow your mind to focus on the stuff that we care about, which is the piece of paper in front of us. This is all that matters, and all the other stuff is a distraction. The only way you can get it away is to have it organized.
I love you talk about it as a bit of a luxury, but this is a really consistent theme. You're very clear in how you're articulating it. Other guests, Brandon Stanton, who created the Humans of New York, which you may be familiar with.
Oh yes, yeah,
he's so protective of his time, and this idea that if you as an artist are able to, through financial means, through collaboration, or through other means, maximize the amount of time that you can spend doing your craft, or if you can keep that time free in order to explore, and as you talked about, putting pen to paper, that is the way to the most happiness and to the best work. So you've been an open advocate on process, which is sort of the tip of the spear we've just been talking about. And in Sunday Sketching, there's a pull quote that says, "Relying on craft and routine is a lot less sexy than being an artistic genius, but it is an excellent strategy for not going insane."
It's true. I mean, I think like the one way I try to approach everything is really try to compartmentalize, and also try to compartmentalize what I do every day. And when you're a professional designer, photographer, like doing motion graphics, everything, there is your day job, and your day job is to kind of create decent stuff that solves other people's problems. And the bar is doing what I like to call unembarrassing work. Somebody needs something, it needs to kind of, if you do a movie, it needs to not stop, it needs to have a beginning and an end, it needs to have full color. If I do an editorial illustration, I need to do something where they don't get bombarded with letters to the editor and say this is the most embarrassing thing ever. Whether that thing makes it into an annual or even into my portfolio has nothing to do with my assignment. This is not what people want from me. So I think the first thing I have to do is learn to reach that level of unembarrassing, no matter what, no matter how tired I am, no matter what day it is, no matter what the assignment is, no matter how the client behaves or misbehaves. This is something you have to have down cold. And this is something fortunately, that I think we can learn. This is just, like whether you're a photographer, I'm sure I can send you out now. You can rip off your headphones, run out and do a decent photo. Something you can print in a magazine and in a poster. And this is not because you're a genius, which you're also, but because you've done it for years and years. You just like have the craft. It's a little too dark. I'm going to do this. And this is the thing that lets you sleep at night. And then on top of that, we can say, okay, maybe, and this is a question of luck. Like maybe one day you walk out and this magic thing happens. This bird flies by right at the right moment, lines up with the lamppost, and this is the stuff that then ends up in your portfolio, and everybody goes, "Oh, he's a genius." No, there was luck, but the luck was only possible on this foundation of doing it over and over and over again, and the beautiful thing of that is it relieves us of this pressure to have a magic moment, I think. Because this is too much. Like if you sit there and you feel I have to come up with something that will end up being the cover of my retrospective, this is something that I find absolutely suffocating. But I think this is kind of our like was for me for a long time. That was my default position. It's like, oh my God, people expect like me to kind of like live up to my lucky moments, and this is terrible. And this will make it absolutely impossible to actually create something magic, I think.
Yeah, I'm gonna keep reading a couple of pull quotes from the book because it's just it epitomizes what you're sharing right now. And there's some graphs here, some charts about getting good work out there in the world. And it says even in the absence of talent and inspiration, you can, through sheer practice, become so good at art that you can reliably deliver, quote, very good work. Now, great work, that's something else entirely. For great work, you also need a lot of skill and craft, but you need something else that you can't control. The next graph has a picture of the bar chart of craft with a cherry on top. And it says, once you've accepted this, your life actually becomes a lot easier. And if you're a client, remember, all you can ask from an artist is very good work. Great work is not actually planable. Do you stand by that?
No, I stand by it. And I find this very challenging. Also because I changed my work. Some of the work that I do now, often on Instagram, they're really spontaneous sketches, and they're fun. And I know they work on this whole like social media sphere, but actually for a professional designer, these things are stupid because people come and they say, "Oh, I like that thing. Can I have 3 more of that?" And usually that's the deal. When I look at your portfolio and you show me a certain quality of whatever lighting, and I say, "Oh, can I hire you for a campaign?" And you go like, "Oh no, sorry, that was just a lucky shot. There's no way I cannot recreate this. You cannot. This is not a professional. There's not a professional attitude. Of course, it's flattering when people like it, but I think a portfolio it's a promise, and I think especially when you're starting out, you have to be extremely careful about what you put in your portfolio because people will ask you to do something like that. And this is a difference. For me, the difference between art and illustration is not so much a quality thing. It's more really a question of how much you can promise it. If I have a lucky moment, I can put it on the wall. I can sell a print of it and say like this, I did this, I'm proud of it. If you like it, it's great. But I can't recreate it. And we often have that anywhere at art school, it's likenesses. You draw a perfect likeness of somebody. You just catch the spirit of whatever, Tom Cruise. And it's just like, it's awesome. I'm going to put this in my portfolio. It's a perfect drawing. People will come to you and say like, oh, now do Samuel L. Jackson. And it's impossible. So I think it's important never to put your life.
Uh-oh, I think we lost him. Christoph, you're frozen. If you can come back to life, please do. We're hanging on every word. While we're waiting for his connection to improve, I want to give a shout out to Renata. Oh, are you there? Are you back?
Okay, yeah. I just turned off Wi-Fi on and off. The secret to life. Can you give me a thumbs
Yep.
up? Oh, very good. Sorry, I don't know where I lost you. Sorry about that.
No.
Yeah.
Go ahead. You just keep in your storytelling, or I can restart if.
It was really about this idea of like the one thing is what you promise to a client, whether you promise like a lucky moment, but the even more I think dangerous thing is if you expect it from yourself. If you look at yourself, the stuff that you do, and feel like, oh God, it was like I look back at kind of like the 5 great things that happened, maybe a year ago, 5 years ago, and you're judging the thing that you're creating right now, and you feel, oh, does it live up to that? Because again, this puts so much weight, it eats up all the oxygen that's so necessary, I think, to create work.
Yeah, the concept of process is something that is so unsexy, and it flies in the face of the myth of the genius. And yet, over and over on this show, probably hundreds of conversations, the answer, the antidote to frustration and feeling blocked is a really crisp process where you just sit down and you go to work. And I wanted to ask you to balance this concept of practice and process with us, because you've also said, I remember, I'm not quite sure which book it was, but the concept of only focusing on your craft can also get you on trouble. Because what if you spend all of your time focused on the wrong thing? You've said something about that. I'll find it here in my notes, but this idea, I think it was like a chef spending too much time working on a hamburger when everyone's going vegetarian or something like that. Help us.
No,
how do you both focus on craft and process, but also, not get passed by with the zeitgeist and what's happening in the world? How do you balance those two things?
Well, I think it's important when you're like earlier we said that the craft is a foundation, but it's only the foundation. It's not the house. And you feel like, oh, this feels great. And let's say you draw and you have a certain shapes that work, certain ways to do figures, maybe a certain ways to make jokes, to tell stories. And people come for them, like they like them, and then you do it again, and they come again. Nobody will ever tell you it's enough. They stop calling, but nobody ever says, can you go into a different direction? This is on ourselves. We have to. I think this is the only way. We have to come up with this inspiration to kind of leave what's working, and this is difficult because what's difficult is easy, and what's familiar is easy. So I think this is the whole thing with like when you rely too much on craft, is you can get lost in this thing. And what I said earlier, it's a communication business that we're in. And if we lose the other side, they're not they're not listening to us to listen to us. They want to hear about themselves. We want to I want to create art that gives people a way to start a thinking process. So ultimately, without the audience, the art is nothing. There's nothing more boring for me than artists who do art to show the world how smart they are. I want to feel smart, and I want to feel inspired as the audience when I look at something. This is what matters. What happens between the piece of paper and the eyes and brain of the audience. This is where all the magic happens. What I do, what happens between me and the piece of paper. This is just it's happening at my desk, but it doesn't matter. But I also, and for me, it was a very long way to that realization. I think the misconception that we have about creative work, or a lot of people have, is that we read a book and fireworks go off and we cry or we laugh or something amazing happens and we feel this is writing, because this is how we experience writing, as this surprising, emotional, makes us cry, laugh, or whatever, and we feel, okay, I'm full of emotion as I read things, so I probably have to be full of emotion as I write things, because this is my experience with a book. And so I start writing, and I go like, wow, I'm just like in love, or my heart is broken. I started writing. I'm going to produce a huge pile of crap, I think, because the reaction we get as readers and what we have to put in to cause that reaction are different things. I think if I want to make somebody cry through words, I have to very deliberately move the words back and forth. I have to set up the emotional tension, and then I have to do a twist, and I have to go down that path 50 times and say, okay, I have to hold back the information. I have to wait 2 phrases longer. I move that one adjective in and out. It's all about arranging the breadcrumbs that for the reader the firework goes off. And I think there's no better illustration than the aha moment that you have when you look at an idea. The aha moment you want to have as a reader, but to create an aha moment, for me at least, there's never an aha moment when I draw. The aha moment is lighting the fuse, arranging the path. It's a very small, unspectacular set of decisions that leads to that. To then for the reader have the other thing. And I think if you, as an artist or as a designer, sit there and try to have an aha moment in front of the piece of paper, that's when you have the writer's block. That's when you have the fear of the white page. But I think there's no way to overcome that with waiting for aha.
Waiting for aha. That's the name of the next book. Oh, no, you're saying the same thing. And a guest we had on not too long ago, Roxanne Gray, who's an essayist for the New York Times, said, I'm a professional at making you feel that way. That's where my profession is, in these small moves of words. And the distance between the emotional response that you are having when you read it and the response of the creator who's creating it might be 1,000 miles, right? The work that you're doing to lay the foundation, that is the training, that is, 25 years doing your craft, where you know what word order to put them in. And that does, I think, take a little bit of pressure off. But I want to shift to a different kind of pressure. And you've been very clear as a mechanism for, not getting blocked, to just sit down and do work, compartmentalize as much as you can, have some processes. And yet we are in an industry and a time, and I'll say industry by a creative industry. So that's photography, filmmaking, building businesses, all of these things, where things are accelerating, right? The size of the teams at magazines, many of the magazines that you work at, or the ones that are the most revered in our culture, they used to have huge staffs, and now it's just a couple of folks and a handful of freelancers. And the speed of which business is sort of getting turned under and having to be reinvented, that's only accelerating. And this is so stressful for so many of the creators that are listening and watching. And speaking of, I got to give shout out to Janelle, asking us for more of this great advice. We got LA in the house. We got people all over want to know, like, our industry is continuing to change, and how, as creators, do we manage this seemingly ever accelerating treadmill of work?
It's a difficult one, because I feel I'm right now, it seems to work, but I wouldn't be surprised if kind of tomorrow it stops working. It would be, and if I'm totally surprised and I have absolutely no solution on how to solve it. So it's always a hypothetical. I wouldn't, like, if you tell me, 5 years from now it's going to be over for me, for you, for everybody, I would say yes, good chance of that happening. There's a couple of small things. Again, I think you cannot ignore technology. This is something that no matter what, we have to be on top of that. It can enable us to be more versatile, reach wider audiences. There is, I feel, I love to compare what we do to sports, and there's something that I think we're only at the beginning of this. Again, a question of privilege, where 20 years ago, draw a couple of funny pictures, once you in the system of editorial work, you find you're an in crowd, the art directors know you get work. Now this is so much, the turnover is faster. You have to constantly, as you say, worry about this stuff. So you have the craft in terms of what I'm putting on the page. But I think, like sports people, we have to start thinking about our mental health. How can we have to just deal with this uncertainty and just still do work? And I think this, what I loved when I came to New York, where it's just you have deadlines and you meet the deadlines, and then at night you go out with your friends for beers and for the other designers, and then you talk about the stuff, and it had this fantastic hardcore, oh, we're in there and it's tough, but we love it, and it's also slightly abusive, but it's also kind of fun. And I think maybe it's also growing older, but I think it's very important in this time that you find something in you as an emotional foundation to deal with all these things. And whether it's a hobby, whether it's family, I think friends, absolutely crucial to have to soften the blow of these things. This is not a luxury. This is not, I'm too soft to work 14, 16 hours a day. I think this is an absolutely essential part of it. Another thing, which, again, for the first 5-10 years of my professional life, I didn't even think about it. I was reading the paper because I was doing political stories. I would go see the movies, but I never thought about input. because it was, I have input, I don't have time for research, I'm just like doing work. And I think with everything changing, reading up on art, like reading books, like having a sense of language, having a sense of what's happening in the visual world around us is absolutely crucial. And it's also, for me, crucial not to do it with like, oh, I have to get the latest color combinations for my next piece, but to just like be kind of emotionally prepared for changing, for how things are changing. And that's also what I meant earlier with like, when you rely on craft, when I'm just in my little bubble of my work and the feedback loop is just between my drawing and myself, the world kind of like wanders off and doesn't touch me. This takes time and it takes commitment to go into a gallery, to read a book. And it's not my first instinct to do that because I'm so excited to work. I would love to work 14 hours a day, not look at anything else. Sometimes I have to force myself and say like, to kind of clean that brain, can I get new images in there, get away from that stuff. And I think that used to be a luxury, and now I would say it's a necessity. It's something that when you're a professional designer, you have to set time aside for that, because otherwise it will come back to haunt you.
I'm enjoying just feeding you your own quotes after you've said something. If you don't mind, I'm going to keep that as an amazing quote right here. It says, "Right now I'm blissfully busy, but I'm aware the party can end very quickly. The only thing I can do to make sure my work is in demand is actually focus on doing good work. This is difficult in the best of circumstances, and it gets downright impossible when you have to simultaneously worry about money." So this is a little bit, it seems like you're referencing this idea of you have to find this balance between commitment to the work and sitting down in front of the paper and not being caught up in trying to create something of genius, but rather just creating, and also not living in a vacuum. Like that is a privileged environment that very few people get to operate in, and yet we've got this toxic image that's the world where all artists operate. I just don't know very many. Most of the ones that I know are paranoid about running out of money. They're worried about maybe not their next paycheck, but their next feature film or their next, something. So again, how do we keep from, what's the balance here? How do you find the balance between giving yourself room to create and not living in a bubble? Is that the tension is this the new struggle for artists, or has this always been the case?
Well, I think to a degree it's always been the case. I think we're much more aware of it now. And at some point also it's about personality. I know some people who can operate with like the most insane stuff going on in the background. I know I have to be in emotionally an absolutely blissful place, otherwise I can't work. If I have some fight with somebody, if somebody is angry at me, it shuts down all my work. I'm incapable of focusing on the page. If there's some kind of nasty stuff. So the moment I smell trouble, I back off. But this is my personal. Other people can't work like that. That's probably, I couldn't be in like the film business where you're like a certain amount of kind of back and forth and a little, hard-nosed discussion is an essential part of the job. I'm just not built for that. But I think it's important to be aware of where your limitations are. And with the financial thing is always difficult. And so there's kind of two ends. The one is like people who are so independently rich and successful that they don't have to think about it. Then you're fine. You can kind of go kind of create murals in some cave and be happy. Then there's the other part, which of course encapsulates a lot of us, is who just really have to worry paycheck to paycheck. If that's the case, you can't move things around. You just have to kind of pay for school. And what I find really freaky, like the whole medical, the health insurance thing in the States is something that I find unfathomable, especially for freelancers. This is a true tragedy that this is something that constantly looms over all the freelancers. I mean, this, I think, would make life so much better if that threat was just not there.
It's the number one cause for bankruptcy in the United States.
Yes.
Medical.
Yeah, and vice versa. It's like the moment you're bankrupt, also you lose your health insurance, and so I think it's so terrible. But so I think the only thing we can really talk about is the middle thing. Let's say you somehow make enough money that you have a little room to breathe. What I think is so important is to see money as an enabler to buy a new computer, to maybe even hire somebody, but also to give you breathing room. And for me, the greatest disasters that I heard from friends and colleagues where like careers ended, it was usually not the great, like a terrible disease or some other tragedy. It was usually overhead. People went ahead and started hiring, starting to move in a huge office space and said, I'm going to do it big. And some people have done it extremely successfully. But these are the only times where I heard that great careers have nosedived, was when people overextended them on monthly expenses. And if I have to take a loan of $5,000 to kind of get a new camera or computer, I might be able to deal with that. But if I have $5,000 month after month after month, after half a year, this is a hole that's impossible to climb out of. And so I'm extremely wary of that stuff. And I try to kind of, as much as possible, and again, this is very personal, but have something that just says this doomsday moment is always 3 months away. So I feel for the next 5 hours, I can focus on my drawing. And once a week or once a month, I'll have to check and really see, like, am I really in a good spot or not? But I think keeping that kind of that scary moment a few months out, this will allow you to every day kind of go into a place of uninterrupted creative work where the whole financial worry doesn't seep in. I think if you can do that, this is the most essential luxury, like better than the fastest computer and the greatest cameras. If you can afford this level of mental freedom that just like 3 months of expenses in the bank can give you. This is the best the best equipment you should shoot for, I think, as a freelancer.
Yeah, there's nothing quite as valuable as peace of mind.
Yeah.
And that the space to create. I want to shift our attention to, you've spoken about technology quite a bit here in our conversation about how you should organize it, make it useful to you, things like Dropbox, and a little bit tactical. But I want to go to the concept of technology, and that is the ability you shared. If you're just now tuning in, well, I'm sad that you've missed our discussion, but I'm here with Christoph Niemann, and the amazing illustrator behind so many things from the New Yorker, National Geographic, New York Times Magazine. And for those who do pay attention to you on social media, it looks like you do a lot of, you said earlier just a moment ago about sketches and just lightweight sort of tests that you continue to put out in the world. And so it seems like you simultaneously use this as a vehicle for testing, and you're very active there. And yet, I've heard you speak before in other places that you can't actually judge the merit of work based on the number of likes, because these algorithms, they do such a fantastic job of messing with our own brain as a function of, that is by design. So, as so many other things, this is a little bit paradoxical. And I'm wondering if you can help us understand, because you clearly are a master at this. You use it in the ways that you can get information, market, evaluating the efficacy of an idea, and yet you don't get attached to the outcome. So for again, folks watching from all over the world now, help us understand how you nailed this balance, because it's as another professional artist watching you, I can see you testing and playing, and then you see, if you're really familiar with your work, you see it pop up again later, something you tested 6 months ago. So help us understand your relationship with social media.
Well, I think there's really two separate things we have to discuss. The one is social media, and I think let's talk about the bad stuff of social media first. So the most terrible thing really is, I think, that we have an algorithm. First of all, we have the design aspect. Instagram is beautiful, but Instagram is tiny, and Instagram also, I scroll through my feed, so I probably have like a tenth of a second to stop and say, oh, there's something happening here. Why do I stop? It's because it's very, very intriguing for one way, or because it's very familiar. A celebrity face, something that I've seen before that I love. So if I do something that's not attention stopping in this like 0.3 seconds, the chances for the algorithm to pick it up is dramatically going down. So the moment I try to go against that, it's really the chances of that stuff living is not really great. And this is something you have to be aware of. Also, even if today I figured it out, all my art fits this bill perfectly, I get like so many likes, everything's great. Tomorrow they might change the algorithm. For some reason, like they say, only images with green on the bottom, an animal on the upper left, and a lighthouse on the upper right is the only thing that works. I sit here and say, where are all my fans? Where are all my likes? They're gone. And it can drive you absolutely insane if you try to think, why did this thing work or doesn't? And I've done it for a while. I have absolutely no idea what works and what doesn't work. Maybe there's something with the time of the day or with the technique. It makes no sense to me. The fantastic thing about social media, and I think that's also the reason why we have to do it. It doesn't matter whether you have 100 followers or 100,000. For the first time, it has given us as creators the chance to talk to the audience directly. We were absolutely dependent until 10 years ago for middlemen, and the middlemen I love, like the newspapers, the magazines, the museums, the publishers. They took care of that. They went to the audience. We had to give our stuff to them. They would carry it on to the audience. All we had to do is like sit there, hand it to the art director, and not think about it anymore. Now we have the chance to actually go directly to the audience. And there was always the frustration. I'm sure you give them 5 options. They go for number 4, and no, number 1, that's the good one. Why don't you get it? Now we can take number 1 and say, here, audience, decide for yourself. And this I love. This part of talking directly to the audience is absolutely amazing. The audience is so much smarter than most editors would give them credit for, especially when it comes to visuals. I mean, this has been for me the single biggest revelation of social media, is that people get stuff on such a subtle level. But ultimately, and this is something where I think it changes all the time, and it's ultimately for our work, it doesn't matter that much because we're in the same boat as everybody who does music or sells a product. You have to spend some time with it. I think there's no science for that. The more interesting question for me is technology at large. So the technology of creating stuff. And this really is the question that I turn on my computer. Why? Why don't I take a brush and a jar of ink? Like, what happens at the computer? And for me, the simplest way to say, like, when do I try to use the computer is that when it solves a problem I had before I turned on the computer. And so as an example, like as I mentioned earlier, as a kid, you draw a house, you want the roof to be red. You try all the felt tip markers and watercolors, it's always like uneven. And I remember the first time taking Photoshop, I draw the roof, fill, and it's like 100 magenta, 100 yellow. Perfect. Like one flat color. And this was like the answer to my prayers of like age 4 to 18. It was just magical. And so I'm always looking for these things. When I make movies, when I make animations, I have something that I want to do, and the computer allows me to do this much more efficient, much faster, nicer, higher quality than I could with other means. And there's other things. And then the computer or technology, like technology companies, they want you to use their product. They need to innovate to keep things interesting. So they come up with new stuff. And often you go like, oh, this is fun. But you're like, why? And maybe I piss off a few web designers here. My favorite example is parallax scrolling. This is a thing. It was like super hot 5 years ago. Everything was parallax scrolling. It's like, why? I have absolutely no desire to have image and text flowed by each other. This was a beautiful gimmick. It was interesting for a month and a half, but it was just, it didn't do anything in terms of communication. And I think when you look through your applications, whether it's Illustrator or Photoshop or After Effects, it's 90% stuff that doesn't serve a storytelling purpose. And this is what I try to stay away from, because I feel I just get lost in it and I just create technology for technology's sake. This is especially true when it comes to VR, AR, which I've played with a lot. But a lot of it is always like, do I do this because it's possible, because I find it stimulating creatively, or is there actually a benefit for the reader out there? Is somebody saying like, oh, I can turn around and see what's above me and below me. This is make my experience better. And as much as I love VR, I have to admit, I was never sitting in a James Bond movie and say, gee, I wish I could turn around and see what's happening on the top of that building there. I don't care. I want to see what's happening right in front of my eyes. I want the director to pull me right to that thing. So I think VR and AR are fantastic. They are fantastic opportunities, but I think for this kind of like narration, surprise-based storytelling, they're not great tools. And I think we're drawn to them because they're new and they're sexy. But I think it's very important for us to be very critical of all the shiny new things in front of us.
How that applies to so many things, to cameras, to cinema, to like the size of the production does not equal the quality of the work. The expense, of your tools is not a correlation to what you can produce.
But I have to interrupt you here.
Please.
With cameras, it's a totally different animal, because cameras are so sexy, and I just wish I could afford to just buy new cameras all the time. Just like get like one of these new chunky things and different lenses. I don't care what they produce. I probably like my images look the same with all of them. I think the only difference is the resolution. But I just love it's so much better than getting a new application for the computer. But I'm sure you have that experience, right?
Oh yeah, so many times you start getting the new cameras just because of the new cameras and not necessarily the features. Like, oh, the new Pro Nikon just came out. I've got to get that one. And you don't even know why. You just, as a professional, that's, I guess, one of the things that you're...
It's a fantastic excuse, yeah. I think that one of the few great benefits of being an artist, like art supply stores. And just like getting all those brushes and the all the stuff that I never use. But it's just, I just love that so much. It has very little artistic benefit, but oh God, it's so sexy.
I love it. This is going to be a short leap, but speaking of sexy, I was so moved by your feature segment in the series Abstract on Netflix. And one of our mutual friends, the producer of that, Scott Dadich, who's also been on the show. If you're just tuning in, you can go back and find a previous episode with just Google my name and Scott's name. But he produced an amazing series, co-produced on Netflix, called Abstract: The Art of Design, in which you were one of the featured creators, along with a handful of other people who are also amongst the best in the world at their craft. So 2 questions. A, what was that like being first selected amongst, peers of the very, very, very top in every field, top architects, designers, interior folks, and second, the process of making a 30 minutes or 60 minutes? I'm missing. I forgot.
It was like 40-something, 45, 40.
Yeah, and about having a film crew follow you around and making a 45-minute documentary that now clearly millions and millions of people have seen it. If you haven't seen this, folks, go check it out on your Netflix, Abstract: The Art of Design, especially the 2017 season, which is where Christophe was featured. So what was that like, A, being selected, and then B, what was the process of making that film like?
Well, being selected was kind of like a little whatever, because